Among the many virtues that a Christian is called to have, there is one that the saints tend to recommend more than all the others. One that shines forth in a special way and stands out, because this virtue, true to its nature, does not boast of itself, but leads us to all the other virtues. And this is the virtue of humility. Humility is not the greatest of all the virtues. The theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, with love being the greatest among the three, occupy the highest place in excellence among all other virtues. But then, why do the saints constantly recommend this particular virtue of humility more than some others, and hold it in special esteem? Why does Jesus himself recommend this virtue to us when he says, "Learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart"? Saint Dominic, the founder and father of the Dominican order, while he lay on his deathbed, approaching his final moments, spoke specially about practicing the humility of Christ to the Dominican brothers who had gathered around him. What is humility then? And what makes it unique? Today, the 6th day of the novena to Saint Dominic, we will reflect on the virtue of humility and also see how Saint Dominic practiced this virtue in his earthly life. We will do this by comparing humility to 3 figures. The first figure or comparison of humility is this. Humility is a door. What do I mean when I say this? Humility can be compared to a door that serves as the entrance of God into our lives. We human beings build up walls and barriers that prevent God from entering into our lives. But the greatest barrier between us and God is not sin, as many of us are prone to think. Rather, it is pride. Sin separates us from God, but God is able to take away our sins and purify us with His grace. What stands in His way is our pride. What is the solution then? Open the door of humility. Jesus says in Revelation chapter 3 verse 20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears me and opens the door, I will enter and eat with him." Though Saint Dominic lived his whole life in holiness, he never considered himself to be perfect, but always viewed himself as a sinner, constantly in need of God's mercy and grace. He did not build a wall of pride around him, despite the great things he had been able to do in his life. And so, there was no barrier that prevented God from entering into his life. His door of humility was always open, and he always remained a powerful instrument in the hand of God. The second figure of humility that we are considering is this. Humility is a mirror. Not a broken mirror that shows a disfigured image. Neither is it a false mirror that only shows whatever you like, but a true mirror in which one can see themselves and the world around them clearly and as it really is. What do I mean by this? Having humility is to see and accept yourself as you are, and to know that whatever good that is in you has its beginning in God. Those who are proud think themselves to be greater than what they actually are in reality. They overestimate themselves and glory in their own excellence without acknowledging the role and impact that God has had in their lives. In this way, pride becomes a false mirror that only shows you what you like to see about yourself and not the truth as it is. But pride is not the only vice contrary to humility as we might think. The other extreme contrary to humility and to truth is belittling yourself or underestimating yourself, seeing yourself as smaller or littler than you actually are. We do this when we do not acknowledge the graces, gifts, or talents that God has already given us, or when we believe that God cannot overcome our personal weaknesses and shortcomings, when we consider ourselves to be useless or incapable or anything good. But Jesus said, "Let your light shine before others, so that people may see your good works and glorify God." God has surely given you something good. Use it. Again, St. Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Yes, we are weak, but we are not discouraged because Christ is stronger than our weakness. St. Dominic practiced this all through his life. Whenever he went to preach, he said, I go not certain of myself, but certain of God who sends me. He looked at himself in the mirror of humility, thanked God for his strengths, and let God overcome his weaknesses. The final figure of humility that we will consider is this. Humility is a ladder resembling Jacob's ladder in the Old Testament, whose one end reaches heaven and the other end touches the earth. A flight of steps of extraordinary nature. Now I say extraordinary nature because as we climb down this ladder towards the earth, we find ourselves miraculously reaching closer to heaven. Now this might seem confusing at first, but this is what Jesus meant when he said, those who humble themselves will be exalted. Humility comes from the Latin word humus, which means ground or earth. And this is where humility gets its meaning from. It refers to lowering yourself to the ground. In today's language, we tend to say the phrase down to earth when we are referring to humility. So to humble yourself is to lower yourself before God and others, to consider others to be better than you and to serve them. Jesus exemplified this when he who was God became man, and he, as man, bent down to wash the feet of his disciples. This is God's promise, that whoever humbles themselves shall be exalted. So if you wish to be great, humble yourself. When you find yourself climbing down the ladder of humility, you will also find yourself climbing higher to heavenly glory. While on his deathbed, Saint Dominic did not ask his brothers to keep his body in a special place to be revered and venerated after his death. Rather, he asked to be buried under the feet of his Dominican brothers. Till the very end of his life, even when he was so sure that he would be entering into heaven, Saint Dominic did not stop climbing the ladder of humility. My dear brothers and sisters, we are all called to humility during the coming days as we continue to follow in the footsteps of Jesus and the footsteps of Saint Dominic. Let us open the door of humility, see ourselves in the mirror of humility, and climb the ladder of humility. Praise be to Jesus Christ.